because I think some of you don't understand exactly what's being proposed. I have to say that I don't disagree with many of the things that Trent has said, but I am arguing today in favor of the National Popular Vote movement.
Hold the microphone closer.
The National Popular Vote movement, not only as an end in itself, to essentially remove the power from the Electoral College, but also as a way of getting people to be more informed about the system that we have in place, and possibly mobilizing people to people in states to push for a constitutional amendment that would eliminate the Electoral College and replace it with a system of direct popular vote. I see the United States, the Carter Center, and other people going around the world observing elections and raising questions about what is free and fair. And I wonder if we hold those same standards for ourselves. I'm not sure that National Popular Vote is necessarily the answer to that in terms of making elections freer and fairer in the United States, but I do believe that it moves in a direction that encourages dialogue about this. While it is true that there are elements of this system that could lead to litigation and possibly tensions about outcomes, when I look at the last 20-some years in terms of American elections, what I see is that there's been an incredible increase in the amount of litigation we have in the system in place. In many, many states, not just Ohio and Florida and Washington, but lots and lots of states, we've seen extensive litigation, either about governorships, but especially about presidential elections. And I go back and look at, for example, the election of 2000, the one that many of you remember very, very clearly. Some of you who are younger and newer to the system may see this as historical, but still something that happened in your lifetime. This was a situation where I believe, had it not been for the events of September of 2001, the terrorist attacks, we would have had really serious conversations about how the system operates. And those were pushed down the agenda, understandably in my judgment, by the need to focus on national security and other issues in the Bush administration. But still, in some ways, born of the concerns about that election. And I would also add, in that particular election, a Republican won. Al Gore got what I would argue, for the sake of argument, is not really an insignificant amount of votes. He got over 500,000 more votes than George W. Bush, and yet he was not seated as president. In 2004, had John Kerry won 60,000 more votes in the state of Ohio, he would have been president, with George W. Bush winning the popular vote. So, what I'm saying is this has the potential in terms of partisanship to cut both ways. In 2000, we saw what was really I don't have in front of me the number of lawsuits, but the litigation was at every level of government. It was very, very complicated. And in the end, I think people on many, many sides of the issue were dissatisfied with an outcome where the United States Supreme Court essentially decided who would be president. So it's not as if the system we have in place has not led to litigation and more litigation as time has gone by. I think that some of the merits of national popular vote are that it moves us towards a system of direct popular vote, if that's what we see as being most democratic. And it does this in a way that doesn't happen overnight. It happens in states like Washington and forums like this. I, not many months ago, facilitated a forum with the local League of Women Voters over whether or not they would support this proposal, an educational forum. And I think that these kinds of forums are happening all around the country. It may very well be, as this moves along, if it moves along, that we see a situation where some of the things that Trent has talked about in terms of multiple candidates, candidates with a minority of the vote being elected, that some of these things can be remedied through discussions about rules that could be put in place in terms of when there would be runoff elections or things of that sort. So there's time to do that in this system. And I would say, speaking of other mobilizations for social change, because I see this as a movement for change, not just a process, and not just an end, but a means to an end of a more democratic system. I would remind you that in terms of women getting the right to vote, if we go back to saying that the movement began in 1848 at Seneca Falls, New York, and maybe before that it was not until 1920 that women got the right to vote. And that mobilization took place in state legislatures, in the national government, at every level of government. It involved compromise, protest, readjusting what was wanted, and in the end, all of those things happened for years and years and years before that amendment was finally passed. And I would say it was passed in an odd place, Tennessee I might add, by one vote. So I think that the national popular vote movement moves us in that direction. I want to restate what it does because I think it can be a little complicated, and it is important for people to understand what's in place and what's being proposed.